Okay, so we just talked about dynamic microphones. On the other side of the spectrum, there's condenser microphones. Now, condensers are a really, really fun and specific category of microphones that have great benefits to them, but they also are very quirky in some ways. So let's talk a little bit more about what makes a condenser a condenser. So condenser microphones contain a membrane or a diaphragm that is electrically conductive and requires 48 volts of phantom power, usually. And these mics are very, very, very sensitive. They're very good at picking up detail and are great at creating accurate representations of the sound source. Generally, they're used in the studio. And that's really why we have condenser mics, is because we can capture all the detail we want in the studio without worrying about other things getting into it. However, there is a place for condenser mics on a stage. In fact, there's a few places specifically that you'll see in the church world where condenser mic will be used. So my favorite condenser mic ever to use is the AKG C414. And that's because it is a great multi-purpose microphone. It is almost a Swiss Army knife of condenser microphones because it has a bunch of options to it, but it also sounds great on just about anything. It's rare in that it is really good at capturing high SPL information like a dynamic mic would. So it's great for capturing things on toms or even a little bit of snare if you had to. It really shines though as overheads or on vocals. Now, you're not going to use this on a stage for vocal capture for a worship leader, but for on overheads where it's capturing the details of the drum kit as a whole, it's really, really great. In fact, it's probably one of my favorite mic combinations ever, is using a pair of AKG C414s with whatever kind of close mics you've got. Man, there's just something about the image you can get out of it. For a condenser microphone kit at the price point it is, it's really great, especially for live use. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have a big enough stage where there's some separation between your vocalist and any live sound sources on stage, then you can upgrade from that SM58 or whatever dynamic microphone you're using and look at upgrading to a condenser vocal microphone or a handheld condenser microphone. Something like the KMS 105 by Neumann. We have one at my church and we love it. It is so great at picking up just the clarity and detail of a vocal. I've yet to find someone who doesn't sound good on it, to be honest with you. It's basically like having a studio in your hand for your vocalist. However, you got to have the right space for it and the right, ability to isolate that vocal from everything else, because it will pick up a lot of drums and a lot of live sound sources on the stage because it is a condenser. Regardless of the fact that it's a small one, it will pick up everything. So you got to work with your vocalist to make sure that they keep it as close to their mouth as possible, so that way you can keep the sound only coming from there. And then you also need to work with your stage and your rigging to make sure that you have as much isolation and separation of other instruments from it. So if you can make it work, it sounds great. But I want to say this before we go any further, in that when it comes to condenser microphones, you don't need them. You don't. You can get by with dynamic microphones, no problem. In fact, I see condenser microphones very much as a luxury. They're not always the right choice. If you're in a space where you just don't have enough control to keep things from bleeding into each other, that's totally fine. Use dynamic microphones or use condenser microphones that are meant for those scenarios. There are a few out there, but really stick to just what works best for your system. So if you've got a small space with a loud drum kit and you're trying to keep things from bleeding into each other, dynamic microphones can be the way to go. If you've got the space for it though, you can start looking at condenser microphones for certain things. Again, I recommend condenser microphones for overheads because they sound great and they pick up all the detail. However, there's some great microphones that are good for capturing the whole kit. There's one from a company called Heil. They make the PR40, I believe. That is a great large diaphragm dynamic microphone. It's a big microphone, but it's a dynamic, so it actually only picks up what's right in front of it. It's great for overheads. So use your best judgment when it comes to dynamic or condenser and figure out what works best in your space. Now let's move on to our last category here of microphones, which is going to be ribbon microphones and shotgun mics. Let's get to it.